They never see it coming. That's the first rule of imperial collapse. The empire at its peak believes it's eternal, exceptional, different from all the empires that came before. Rome thought it would last forever. The British believed the sun would never set on their empire. The Soviet Union was convinced it represented the inevitable future of humanity. All of them were wrong. All of them followed the exact same 7-stage pattern of rise and fall. And all of them dismissed the pattern as irrelevant to their unique circumstances until it was too late to change course. The United States is not different. We're not exceptional. We're not immune to the laws of imperial decay. We're just the latest empire following the same predictable sequence that destroyed every superpower in history. And we're deep into stage 5 of a 7-stage collapse cycle. This isn't opinion. This isn't political bias. This is mathematical analysis of power cycles that have repeated for over 2,000 years. From Rome to Britain to the Soviet Union, every empire follows the identical pattern: rise through military strength and economic growth, peak through cultural dominance and maximum territorial control, then decline through overextension, financial crisis, internal collapse, final war, and sudden disintegration. The timing varies. The specific triggers change, but the sequence never fails. Rome took 400 years to complete the cycle. The British Empire took 200 years. The Soviet Union collapsed in 69 years. Each successive empire moves through the stages faster than the last because the global economy accelerates the cycles. The United States has been an empire for 80 years. We should have 100 years left if we followed historical timing, but we won't. We're accelerating through the final stages faster than any empire in history. Let me show you the 7 stages, how every previous empire followed them, and exactly where the United States stands in the sequence. Because once you see the pattern, you'll understand that what's happening to America isn't political dysfunction or economic uncertainty. It's imperial collapse, right on schedule. Stage 1, the rise, foundation, through military dominance. Every empire begins the same way. A nation or city-state develops military superiority over its neighbors, usually through technological innovation, superior organization, or geographic advantage. Early victories generate wealth through conquest, which funds larger armies, which enable more conquest. Rome, 7053 BC, 27 BC. Rome's rise began with superior military organization. The Roman legion was more disciplined and adaptable than the armies of their Italian neighbors. Early victories against the Etruscans and Gauls generated wealth that funded expansion across the Mediterranean. Britain, 1600-1800. British naval supremacy, developed through geographic necessity as an island nation, enabled global expansion. Control of sea lanes allowed Britain to dominate global trade and establish colonies on every continent. Soviet Union, 1917-1945. The Bolsheviks gained control through superior organization and ideological commitment. Military victories in the Russian Civil War and World War II established Soviet dominance over Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. United States, 1898, 1945. American rise began with the Spanish-American War in 1898, establishing the U.S. as a global power. World War II victory made America the dominant military force on Earth, with nuclear weapons, the world's largest navy, and bases across the globe. During Stage 1, the rising power is focused, disciplined, and hungry. Military victories create economic growth. Economic growth funds territorial expansion. Success breeds confidence and unity. The rising empire believes its success stems from superior values, better systems, or divine favor. This belief becomes the foundation of imperial ideology that will later prevent adaptation when conditions change. Stage 2, the Golden Age. Peak power and cultural dominance. Stage 2 is the empire's golden age. Military dominance is complete. Economic growth creates widespread prosperity. Cultural influence spreads globally as other nations adopt the empire's language, customs, and values. Rome, 27 BC, 1880. The Pax Romana. Roman legions controlled territory from Britain to Mesopotamia. Roman law, language, and culture dominated the civilized world. Rome was the economic and cultural center of human civilization. Britain, 1800-1914. The Victorian era and Edwardian period. Britain controlled 25% of the world's landmass and population. English became the language of international commerce. British values, technology, and institutions shaped global development. Soviet Union, 1945-1970. The space age and decolonization period. Soviet military power, balanced American might, communist ideology inspired revolutionary movements across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The USSR appeared to represent the future of human society. The United States, 1945-1990. The American century. The US had the world's largest economy, most powerful military, and dominant culture. American movies, music, and brands penetrated every market. Democracy and capitalism seemed to be the inevitable future for all nations. During Stage 2, the empire feels invincible. Military threats are minimal. Economic growth creates prosperity for large portions of the population. Cultural confidence is at its peak. Stage 2 contains the seeds of future problems. Success breeds complacency. Prosperity reduces the military and economic discipline that created the empire's dominance. The empire begins to believe its success is permanent, rather than the result of specific historical conditions. Stage 3, overextension. Military commitments exceed capacity. Stage 3 begins when the empire's military commitments exceed its ability to maintain them effectively. This usually happens gradually as the empire responds to multiple simultaneous challenges without recognizing that it lacks the resources to address all of them. Rome, 2035 AD, Roman legions were spread across an enormous frontier from Scotland to Iraq. Barbarian tribes pressed against the borders, while internal rebellions required military response. Rome could no longer adequately defend all its territory simultaneously. Britain, 1914-1939. Two world wars revealed that Britain could no longer defend its global empire without allies. The cost of maintaining naval supremacy exceeded Britain's economic capacity. Dominions began asserting independence while new powers challenged British control. Soviet Union, 1970-1985. The USSR was supporting communist movements and governments in Angola, Ethiopia, Nicaragua, Cuba, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, while maintaining nuclear parity with the United States and controlling Eastern Europe. The military burden consumed 20% of GDP. United States, 2001 present. America maintains military bases in 80 countries, security commitments to dozens of allies, and active military operations in multiple theaters. The Afghanistan and Iraq wars alone cost over $2 trillion, while the U.S. simultaneously confronts China, Russia, and Iran. During Stage 3, the empire's leaders recognize that military resources are stretched, but believe the commitments are temporary or manageable. Each individual commitment seems necessary and affordable. The cumulative burden is ignored or minimized. Military overextension creates economic strain that begins to undermine the prosperity of Stage 2. Defense spending crowds out productive investment. Wars become expensive rather than profitable. Stage 4, financial crisis. Debt explosion and currency devaluation. Stage 4 occurs when the cost of maintaining military overextension triggers financial crisis. The empire has three options: raise taxes, cut military commitments, or borrow money. Empires always choose borrowing because the other options are politically unacceptable. Rome, 2035-2084 AD. The crisis of the 3rd century. Rome debased its currency to fund military operations. Silver content of Roman coins fell from 80% to 5%. Hyperinflation destroyed savings and trade. The empire nearly collapsed before Diocletian's reforms temporarily stabilized the situation. Britain, 1914-1945. Two world wars forced Britain to borrow massively from the United States. British war debt, 25% of GDP. The pound sterling lost its role as the global reserve currency. Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard and accept American financial dominance. Soviet Union, 1985-1991. Soviet military spending and economic stagnation created unsustainable fiscal pressures. The USSR couldn't finance both military competition with the West and basic consumer goods for its population. Economic reforms triggered political collapse. United States, 2008 present. The 2008 financial crisis, COVID-19 response, and ongoing military commitments have driven U.S. debt to $37 trillion, 13.2% of GDP. Interest payments exceed $1 trillion annually. The Federal Reserve prints money to finance government operations, undermining the dollar's stability. During Stage 4, empire leaders convince themselves that financial problems are temporary and that economic growth will solve debt problems. They print money, manipulate interest rates, and create complex financial instruments to delay the day of reckoning. But the financial crisis reveals that the empire's economic foundation has been weakened by military overextension and domestic neglect. The empire can no longer afford its commitments, but is politically unable to abandon them. Stage 5, internal collapse, social division, and institutional decay. Stage 5 is the most dangerous phase of imperial decline. Financial crisis creates economic inequality and social tensions that tear apart the unity that once made the empire strong. Institutions lose legitimacy. Political divisions become irreconcilable. Rome, 2044-4076 AD, the empire split into western and eastern halves. Barbarian tribes penetrated deeply into Roman territory. Economic collapse led to the decline of cities and reversion to local subsistence economies. Political authority fragmented among multiple competing emperors. Britain, 1918-1956. Two world wars and economic depression created class conflict and political instability. The empire began fragmenting as India, Ireland, and other territories demanded independence. British society was divided between those who wanted to maintain the empire and those who accepted its end. Soviet Union 1985-1991. Glasnost and perestroika unleashed social forces that the Communist Party couldn't control. Ethnic tensions erupted into independence movements. Economic reforms failed, while political reforms undermined the authority of the central government. United States, 2008 present. American society is more politically divided than at any time since the Civil War. Trust in institutions has collapsed. Economic inequality reaches levels not seen since the 1920s. Political violence is increasing. Half the population believes elections are rigged. During Stage 5, empire leaders recognize that internal problems are serious, but believe they can be managed through reforms or political solutions. They don't understand that internal collapse is the predictable result of earlier stages rather than a separate crisis. Stage 5 is characterized by denial and blame shifting. Leaders blame internal problems on foreign enemies, domestic opponents, or economic conditions, rather than recognizing that imperial overextension has made the problems inevitable. Stage 6, the final war. Confrontation with rising power. Stage 6 occurs when the declining empire faces a direct challenge from a rising power. The declining empire believes it must fight to maintain its position. The rising power believes it must fight to achieve its destiny. Both sides convince themselves that victory is possible and necessary. Rome 376-476 AD. The Visigothic invasion of 376 AD began the final wars that destroyed the Western Roman Empire. Rome could no longer maintain effective armies while defending against multiple barbarian invasions. The sack of Rome in 410 and 4055 AD demonstrated that the empire could no longer defend its capital. Britain, 1939-1945. World War II was Britain's final war as a global superpower. Victory came only through alliance with the United States and Soviet Union, both of which emerged stronger than Britain. The war bankrupted the empire and forced decolonization. Soviet Union, 1979-1989. The Soviet-Afghan War became the USSR's Vietnam. The 10-year conflict drained Soviet resources, while demonstrating that the Red Army could be defeated by determined local resistance. The war accelerated domestic economic and political problems. The United States, 2020s, confrontation with China over Taiwan, technology, and global influences is accelerating. Both nations are preparing for potential military conflict while engaging in economic and technological warfare. The outcome will determine whether America remains the global superpower or China replaces it. Stage 6 is often triggered by the declining empire's attempt to prevent the inevitable power transition. The declining empire launches preemptive actions to maintain its position, but these actions accelerate its decline by depleting resources and revealing weaknesses. The final war usually determines the timing of imperial collapse. Victory can delay collapse for decades, but at the cost of resources, the empire can no longer afford defeat triggers immediate collapse. Stage 7, collapse. Rapid disintegration and power transfer. Stage 7 is sudden and complete. The empire that seemed powerful and permanent suddenly fragments or disappears entirely. Power transfers to successor states or rival empires. The collapse usually happens much faster than anyone expected. Rome, 4076 AD. The last Western Roman emperor was deposed by Germanic chieftain Odoacer. The Western Empire ended not with a great battle, but with a political decision by barbarian allies who no longer saw value in maintaining the fiction of Roman authority. Britain, 1945-1997. The British Empire disintegrated in 50 years. India gained independence in 1947. Most African and Caribbean colonies achieved independence in the 1960s. Hong Kong, the last major territory, was returned to China in Soviet Union, 1991. The USSR collapsed in 900 days. Gorbachev's reforms unleashed forces that destroyed the Communist Party's control. The August 1991 coup attempt failed. By December 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. United States, American collapse hasn't happened yet, but the trajectory is clear. Financial crisis, social division, military overextension, and confrontation with China are accelerating imperial decline. The collapse, when it comes, will be sudden and shocking to most Americans. Stage 7 often begins with what seems like a minor crisis or political event. But in the context of accumulated weaknesses from previous stages, small triggers create cascading failures that bring down the entire system. Imperial collapse is rarely the result of external conquest alone. More often, it's the result of internal decay that makes the empire unable to respond effectively to external challenges. The United States in Stage 5. Internal collapse. The United States is currently deep in Stage 5 of imperial decline. All the characteristics of internal collapse are visible and accelerating. Political division. American politics has become tribal warfare. Republicans and Democrats don't just disagree on policies. They view each other as existential threats to the country. Political violence is increasing. Election results are questioned by both sides. Institutional decay. Trust in major institutions has collapsed. Only 15% of Americans trust Congress. Trust in the Supreme Court, FBI, CDC, and other federal institutions is at historic lows. Institutions designed to unite Americans now divide them. Economic inequality. The wealth gap between rich and poor is larger than at any time since the 1920s. The top 1% controls 32% of wealth, while the bottom 50% controls 2%. The middle class, which once supported American democracy, is shrinking rapidly. Social fragmentation. American society is fragmenting along racial, cultural, and geographic lines. Rural and urban Americans live in different realities. Different ethnic groups have conflicting narratives about American history and future. Financial crisis. The U.S. government owes $37 trillion more than any nation in history. Interest payments consume $1.2 trillion annually. The Federal Reserve prints money to finance government operations, undermining the dollar's stability. Military overextension. America maintains 750 military bases in 80 countries. Active military commitments include NATO defense, Middle East operations, Pacific deterrence against China, and support for Ukraine. These commitments exceed America's capacity to fund and fulfill them. But here's what makes America's Stage 5 particularly dangerous. The speed of decline is accelerating. Previous empires took decades or centuries to move through the stages. America is moving through them in years or decades. Why American decline is accelerating? Several factors are causing American imperial decline to happen faster than previous empires. Information speed. Modern communications mean that imperial weaknesses become globally visible immediately. When America struggles in Afghanistan or faces domestic unrest, the entire world sees it in real time. Previous empires could hide their problems for years or decades. Financial integration. Global financial markets mean that American economic problems spread worldwide instantly. Currency crises, debt problems, and economic instability can trigger global responses that accelerate imperial decline. Nuclear weapons. The existence of nuclear weapons means that Stage 6, the final war, could happen very quickly and with devastating consequences. Previous empires could fight prolonged wars of decline. Nuclear powers face the possibility of immediate total destruction. Economic competition. China's rise as an economic competitor is happening faster than any previous imperial transition. China's GDP growth, technological advancement, and military modernization are accelerating pressure on American global dominance. Domestic polarization. American political divisions are deeper and more irreconcilable than previous empires experienced during their decline phases. The country is close to becoming ungovernable, which would accelerate progression to Stage 6 and 7. Stage 6 preview. The China confrontation. Stage 6 of American imperial decline will be defined by confrontation with China. This confrontation is already beginning and will accelerate over the next decade. Taiwan. China considers Taiwan reunification a core national interest that justifies war. America has committed to defending Taiwan. A military confrontation over Taiwan could trigger Stage technology war. The US and China are engaged in technological competition that resembles preparation for war. Both nations are restricting technology transfers, building separate supply chains, and developing military applications for emerging technologies. Currency war. China is developing alternatives to the dollar-based international financial system. Success would end American ability to finance imperial operations through money printing and debt issuance. Alliance systems. America is building alliance networks, NATO, Quades, AUKUS, to contain China. China is building alternative alliances, BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to counter American dominance. The China confrontation differs from previous imperial transitions because both powers have nuclear weapons. This creates the possibility that Stage 6 could trigger immediate collapse rather than the prolonged decline, typical of previous empires. Can the pattern be broken? The 7-stage pattern of imperial rise and decline has repeated throughout history. But patterns aren't laws of nature. They can potentially be broken if empires recognize their situation and make fundamental changes. Historical precedent. No empire in history has successfully avoided the 7-stage cycle once it entered Stage 4, financial crisis. Reform efforts have failed because they require sacrificing the interests that benefit from imperial power. Required changes. Avoiding collapse would require America to dramatically reduce military commitments, eliminate the federal deficit, reduce inequality, and restore institutional legitimacy. These changes are theoretically possible, but politically unlikely. Political obstacles. American political system makes the necessary changes nearly impossible. Military-industrial complex, profits from overextension, financial sector profits from debt expansion, political parties profit from division and conflict. Historical momentum. Once empires enter stage 5, internal forces make reform extremely difficult. Social divisions prevent unity around necessary changes. Institutional decay prevents effective government action. Financial constraints prevent adequate resources for solutions. The most likely scenario is that America will continue following the historical pattern through stages 6 and 7. The timing is uncertain, but the trajectory appears locked in. The coming collapse, timing and triggers. American imperial collapse will likely happen within the next 10-20 years, triggered by one or more of the following events. Financial crisis. Debt service becomes impossible, triggering currency collapse and economic depression. Government loses ability to finance military operations and domestic programs simultaneously. Military defeat. Confrontation with China results in American military defeat, demonstrating that U.S. military superiority has ended. Allies abandon America for neutrality or alignment with China. Domestic breakdown. Political divisions become so severe that the federal government becomes non-functional. States begin asserting independence or forming regional alliances. Taiwan War. Military conflict over Taiwan triggers broader U.S.-China war that America cannot win without unacceptable costs. Nuclear escalation becomes possible. The collapse, when it comes, will be sudden and shocking. Most Americans will be completely unprepared because they believe American decline is impossible or temporary. After the collapse, what comes next? American imperial collapse will reshape the global order more dramatically than any event since World War II. China ascendant. China will likely become the dominant global power, establishing a new international system based on Chinese interests and values. Multipolar world. Alternative scenario involves multiple regional powers. China, Russia, India, EU competing for influence without any single dominant empire. American fragmentation. The United States could fragment into regional entities with different political systems, economic policies, and international limits. Economic transformation. The dollar's collapse as global reserve currency will force fundamental changes in international trade, finance, and economic policy. The transition from American to post-American global order will be traumatic, dangerous, and unpredictable. Historical imperial transitions have often triggered decades of warfare and economic disruption. The lessons of history. The 7-stage cycle of imperial rise and decline is one of the most consistent patterns in human history. Understanding this pattern provides clarity about America's current situation and likely future. America is not different. We are not exceptional. We are not immune to the laws of imperial decay that have operated for over 2,000 years. We are currently in stage 5 of a 7-stage process that ends in collapse. The remaining stages will happen faster than Americans expect because modern conditions accelerate imperial decline. The pattern can theoretically be broken, but doing so would require changes that are politically impossible given America's current institutional and social realities. Understanding where America stands in the imperial life cycle is essential for making informed decisions about the future. The empire is ending. The only questions are when, how, and what comes next. The United States had a good run. 80 years as the global superpower is impressive by historical standards, but empires always end, and ours will too. The wise course is preparation for what comes after, not denial about what's happening now. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and right now it's rhyming with imperial collapse.